Good afternoon, everyone. Hope you are well, and welcome back to the Apprenticeship Insights podcast. My name is Vinh, and this is the fourth in a series of podcasts from the Alex Group. Good to hear from you all again. Joining us today, we have actually got quite a full house today. So we have, of course, Bally Bhogal, the Managing Director of the Alex Group, and most prestigious Richard Moore of Richard Moore Solutions, and we have a couple of guests with us as well. First, I'd like to introduce you to Clare Sides, who is the head of training for Steris, and also Barry Moss, who works for LEAP Apprenticeships, who are powered by Travis Perkins. Clare and Barry, thank you both for coming. Clare, would you like to give us some information about yourself? What is your background and how long have you been working for Steris?
Sure. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you, Vinh. So yes, I'm Clare Sides. I am the head of training at Steris. I have been in this role now for coming up for 5 years. My role is it's quite complex and varied. I look after all of the training team who deliver technical training, people development, and obviously a big part of my role is actually the apprenticeship provision, which we have recently started to deliver. My background has always been in education. I've worked from early years right into adult education, but really dedicated the last 17 to 18 years in apprenticeships, and that's really where my passion lies, is in apprenticeship provision.
Thank you so much, Clare. I can no doubt you've definitely earned your stripes in the field. So, Barry Moss, the Apprenticeship Manager, thank you again for coming. Please introduce yourself. Tell us a bit more about yourself. What is your background?
Thank you, Vinh. Good afternoon, everyone. Yeah, I've been in apprenticeship delivery for 15 years in many different guises, from starting off as a trainee assessor to internal verification, head of operations at one place, and lots of independent providers. Joined Travis Perkins Group about 9 years ago to work on the apprenticeship programs that they had then. And about 6 years ago, we created LEAP, which is the apprenticeship arm of Travis Perkins Group, to really take apprenticeships forwards and create something special within construction supply, construction manufacturing.
No doubt that you have, Barry. Thank you very much for the information. And like I said before, joining us are the regulars, Richard and Bally. So we've all gathered here today to ask a pretty important question to many employers, and of course we'd like to hear Bally and Richard's input on this too. The big question is why? Why do employers deliver these apprenticeships? Some employers might be more eager to do so than others, and some employers might be better equipped than others to do so. So let's find out some more insights in regards to that, and let's start off again with Clare. So you've been delivering apprenticeships for how long?
It's been quite a long journey, actually, from the initial discussions, which were around 2015-16 time. We then had to set up a whole team. So the journey for us really began when we became approved to deliver, which was in September 2019. And we then started our first delivery of our very first apprentices in January 2020.
Yeah, so that's relatively recent, but there is a lot of background behind that, and I imagine
there is.
There was a lot of work in even just setting up in the first place. Barry, did you find that to be the case as well?
Absolutely, yeah. I think Travis Perkins Group as a group of businesses were involved in apprenticeships a lot longer than a lot longer before I joined. When I joined, we were delivering apprenticeship programs, but it wasn't a funded contract. They wanted to do it for them and didn't want all of the trappings that went along with being an apprenticeship provider. So, but that was 50 to 100 apprentices a year. We got our funded contract back in 2017, and then we increased that to that in 2017 was as an employer provider, and that was really in line with the apprenticeship levy. As you can imagine, Travis Perkins Group was a very heavy levy payer at the time, so they really wanted to maximise that. And then we went main provider from 2019. But yeah, as a process, it's to be a funded, to have a funding contract, to be an approved provider, to get onto the ROAP isn't an easy process at all, and does take a huge amount of work to initiate and maintain.
So I suppose the most logical follow-up question would be, Barry, was do you feel that it was worth it? I mean, all that work that went into it, and like you say, it wasn't an easy process. What were the results? Did you find that the results were positive? Was it worth the effort, or are there other things to improve on at all?
I think there's a huge amount to improve on the process to become a provider. I think there's a huge amount to improve on in businesses in general engaging with apprenticeships. I don't think it's an easy system. I don't think it's made easy. Is it worth it? Of course it is. Yeah. I'm not only paid to say that, I'm living proof of it. I've done an apprenticeship. All of my learning has been through, work-based learning. Why wouldn't you want to do it?
Interestingly enough, Bally, Richard, I think this would be a good time to get your thoughts, because we all know that the process to setting things up is actually particularly difficult. As a follow-up question, Bally, have you ever found that an employer has found it relatively easy? Were there any particular challenges out of all of them that you found to be the most pertinent at all?
Thanks, Vinh. I have never come across an employer or any provider starting out this journey that has ever found it easy. So that's first. That's fairly straightforward. So they've never found it easy. The information that's available out there it can be quite confusing in terms of what steps to take at what point to get into the marketplace. There's quite a few sort of challenges, perhaps some sort of blockers as well. It could be down to people's knowledge, not having ever operated in this industry before, that kind of relative newness, and there's no real step-by-step guide. Albeit in what I've seen in the past few years, the ESFA, the Department for Education, has made it a little bit easier. They have started to sort of write some publications around, what it takes to be a successful or high quality apprenticeship training provider. But all of us that have either ever been involved in apprenticeship training, either as practitioners, and that's a number of us here, if not all of us, and or involved in actually setting up or running an apprenticeship training provider business, we all know differently. I don't know if Richard wants to add to that, but yeah, certainly not my experience that it's been an easy ride at all.
Thank you, Bally. No, not really. I think you've said it perfectly there. In my role, I don't get too involved in providers setting up their apprenticeship provision. That would probably be something that Bally would know more about anyway. So I'm not. I don't interact with my providers at that end of things, but it is certainly something that anecdotally I hear virtually every single provider say is the difficulty, the challenges of the application process to set up apprenticeships in the first place.
Following on from that, Richard, in your experience, what have you found to be the most challenging aspects of apprenticeship delivery overall by employers? Was there anything in particular that has formed a pattern at all in your
I think Claire and Barry may have differing views on this, although I suspect that what I'm about to say is the key challenge, is something that they would probably both echo, is really the need to release the learners for their required hours of off-the-job training, which essentially amounts to roughly 1 day a week, broadly speaking. That undoubtedly, I think, particularly in the current economic climate, where a lot of companies out there, haven't been taking on new staff. They've been pressurizing their existing staff, in terms of working harder, greater efficiency, greater productivity. It's a very difficult economic climate out there. and then to take on apprentices who are essentially, in so many words, going to disappear for 1 day a week for their off-the-job training, whatever form that might take, on top of which they might also have to do English and maths functional skills, and time has got to be created for that as well. That, for me, is almost always the number one recurring challenge for training providers and the employers who work with them, and also indeed for employer providers.
Thank you, Richard. Barry, would you say that's the challenges that you've encountered as well? Were there other challenges as well which you found more difficult at all, is what I'm wondering.
Well, I would hate to disagree with anybody on this panel because it's a wonderful panel. But so the requirement now is 6 hours a week. I think by using natural learning, bearing in mind this is work-based learning, and this is what I think a lot of employers don't kind of get. This is work-based learning. So the naturally occurring learning that you can record is them doing their job. So they're not actually away from their job. If I could wave a magic wand and call it on the job learning, I would, instead of off the job learning, because I don't think that becomes a huge challenge when you think about it in a different way. I think really the biggest challenge for providers and certainly for us is staying relevant, is keeping up to date with all of the new aspects of work that is required, and keeping what we do, relevant to the apprentice and relevant to the employer. They're the things that I think are the biggest challenges and probably take up the most time. For the apprentices, of course it's difficult. As an apprentice, of course I struggled to find time to do the work, but I wanted my apprenticeship, so I made the time for it. I found the time for it. The time thing comes up a lot when I talk to employers, but I think there are ways of looking at it and ways of working with it that will stop that issue.
I see. Claire, do your thoughts mirror that at all? Are you encountering the same challenges also? It's an interesting point you made, Barry, in regards to keeping, correct me if I've got this wrong, but keeping the subject matter relevant and up to date today. Is that, have I got that right?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the nature of any industry that you work in is it's ever evolving. Apprenticeships aren't just there to create someone that's good at their job. They're there to create someone that's excellent at their job, to exceed and excel in their role. So it's not just about teaching them how to be competent to do a job. I know that's what the standards want and deliver. I think for industry, it's important to, yes, we should, that's a given. We should make someone competent with the knowledge, skills and behaviours of their job. But we should be talking about, and we do a lot in our programs, talk about the future. What's next? What's coming? How can we evolve? I tell all of my apprentices, that I've ever engaged with, your manager is brilliant. They're the reason why you're able to do this apprenticeship. They're supporting you. They've made the business what it is, and they're great at their job. But I don't want you to be like them. I want you to be better than them. I want you to come up with the next innovation, the next idea, the next best way of doing things. Don't think anybody should be precious with how we do things. The idea of bringing a new, not always younger, but a new diverse workforce into any industry is to evolve it, is to create something new, to have new eyes on what you do. And that obviously then reflects our customer base as well, which is exactly what we need to do to keep relevant.
That sounds amazing. Thank you, Barry. Claire, I wanted to get your thoughts on that too. What challenges in particular have you faced? And moving forward with that as well, a second question, did you predict that these challenges would be coming forward? Did you see these challenges happening? Did you preempt them, is the word I was searching for? What challenges did you face, and which in particular were the hardest to overcome?
So I think just to go to Barry's point on the off the job, I think it just identifies that with different employee providers, different training providers have different experiences. So for us, off the job was an issue, and that was actually quite surprising to me as an employer provider. It was one of the barriers with some of our managers, some of our teams. But I'm wondering whether or not there is a difference between when there is an apprenticeship with a mandatory diploma attached to it. So our healthcare science, which is what we specialise in, has a mandatory diploma. So in addition to the knowledge, skills and behaviours of the standard, they also have to complete 13 different units within that scope as well. Therefore, they do need time off the job because they need teaching and learning time, study time. They have to complete assignments and written work. So that may be where different providers, employed providers, find it very different and find off the job challenging. Plus the nature of our work in taking people out of the actual production has a knock-on effect to the business and to people getting the customers getting what they need from us. So we have to balance that. And what we did, I agree with what Barry said about, really explaining this in the terminology. We did the same. We do not call it off-the-job training. We call it dedicated learning time, because I think the terminology is so misleading with that it really does create problems where, we can work around these if we use a more suitable terminology. So that was one of the pieces of work that we had to do. And I will echo what Richard has said as well with the functional skills is quite a big thing for us. And we find that it's a challenge because for those people that have maybe been out of education for a long time, haven't got GCSEs or functional skills or concessions, they have to find more time on top of that to actually do the functional skills as well. So that has been a barrier, and it continues to be a difficulty for us and a real challenge, but we're forever finding ways of getting around that. And one of the things really for us as an employer provider was growing the team of trainer assessors, and that's largely because we are so specialised with what we do that to get people with assessing qualifications which we needed because of the mandatory diploma element, we've had to grow our own, which has given us an opportunity to allow people to progress and diversify in their careers with Steris and become trainer assessors. But it's also been a slower process because they must have had the occupational competence in which to be competent assessors. So we've had a few challenges. And if I may, I'd just like to come back to one of Barry's points about being current as well. And one of the things we found as a real benefit, actually, and a real perk to being an employer provider is that we are on the trailblazer for our standard. So we're working on level 6 at the moment for the healthcare science, and we have a part to play in that. So we have some influence and some say in how we shape the standard and how that progresses as well to meet the ever-changing needs and demands of the employer.
Claire, thank you so much. There's a lot to consider, but I also wanted to find out the viewpoints of people on the other side as per se. Bally, Richard, you've heard from Barry and Claire the challenges that they faced, but now you've spoken to many employers between the both of you. Have other employers mirrored these sentiments at all? Have you heard any other different challenges that they've voiced concern over at all?
Completely agree with Barry. A lot of providers, a lot of employers, out there don't realise that they can be quite creative with how they define off-the-job training, particularly in the workplace. A lot of the employers I work with have got around the sort of notion of learners being released for the equivalent of a day for their off-the-job training by actually doing a lot of that off-the-job training within the workplace. So I completely agree with Barry on that. I'd also agree with Claire about the confusion that's caused by the terminology. And in fact, it's interesting to hear Claire call it what she calls it, because I think it's the DFE at the moment are out to consultation on changing the name of off-the-job training. And I think there are 3 options that they're looking at, one of which is calling it dedicated development time, DDT, which is not dissimilar to what Steris and Clare call it, and actually exactly the same name that a couple of my providers quite voluntarily, they've called it dedicated development time as well. So I completely agree with Claire's point that there's a lot of sort of confusion, and Barry sort of alluded to it as well, really, caused by the use of the term off the job training, because very often it isn't really off the job.
So thank you, Richard. Bally, what kind of challenges have they voiced concern over? Does it mirror what Barry and Claire have said? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, for sure. English and maths always comes up. So I know that my guests here and colleagues have all mentioned English and maths. It's always, and actually I was reading a blog last night at BBC News have released information about the number of resits in English and maths that are going to be done, and the fact that they're highest almost since the highest kind of, not particularly on record, but certainly meeting what was just happening before COVID. So they're creeping up, which is not good reading for educators and practitioners in the education space. So English and maths continue to be a worry outside of apprenticeships and within apprenticeships. And then echoing everything that's been said about off the job, gonna throw a couple of new ones in. So the other area is, if you like, employer engagement, but more when we're talking about employer engagement, if you like, the business units and line managers, and how, if you like, responsible, how receptive they are to taking apprentices under their wing, nurturing them. What are they like as apprentice managers? Are they the right types of managers to coach and mentor? Etc., to even coordinate, to be at progress review meetings? Can they give, constructive feedback? So that often comes up as well, but that's not just employer providers, also all training providers that we work with. So that's a bit of a challenge there. And the one that I have to bring up, which is probably going to upset everybody here, is compliance and funding rules. So just the sheer amount of funding rules that go with being an employer provider, all the hoops and restrictions, if you like, placed on you as a provider. Sometimes it's really difficult because you think, I could be really creative. You only have as much time in the day as anybody else has, and sometimes you have to balance that with the quality of that education that you're providing, the being relevant, staying relevant, looking at your industry and where it's going, updating all your curricula, making sure that you're bang on point and ahead of your time, versus all that time that you have to spend with systems and compliance and signatures and the sort of legals, and that can really bring you down. So in fact, everything that Barry and Claire were mentioning about how do we stay relevant, how do we look to the future, rather than let the admin, if you like, of being an employer provider, being a provider, sort of bog us down. So sorry about throwing that into the mix, but that's often the challenge that we come across with providers.
It's a shame you said that, Bally, because from what I know of you, you absolutely love the compliance aspect of apprenticeships. So
I do, but that doesn't necessarily mean that everybody here does. I'm all right with it, quite comfortable.
But yeah. Following on from that, we've heard of many of the challenges that we've all encountered and heard of and faced within the apprenticeship field. Even before the apprenticeships were set up, of course, we would preempt those. This is going to be really difficult. There's a lot of work to do. However, it's still being done. Claire and Barry, both yourself are successful in the apprenticeship field. Why did you make the decision to deliver apprenticeships? What influenced you? What was it about apprenticeships which appealed to you? Barry, I know you said you were an apprentice yourself. Was that influential to your decision to becoming a manager yourself in apprenticeships?
Well, I can't influence a massive PLC like Travis Perkins, but and I feel very fortunate to work for an organisation that is forward thinking with apprenticeships, and that's a very lucky thing. I think with the TP Group PLC, I think they looked at the construction sector and identified an ageing population of colleagues, limited training offers, and a need to attract a more diverse talent pool. They needed to engage with a more diverse talent pool, and we deal with construction supply, construction manufacturing, which is inherently has a very poor demographic mix when you look at it as a whole. So I think the solution really around creating a training program to allow anyone, no matter their background experience, whether they've been in construction before or not, to join with the group, to have a, not just have a job, to have the opportunity of a career, to be able to develop through an organisation the size of Travis Perkins Group. I think that was kind of the reasons, the influencing behind it, but also, to be able to give those people the training and the understanding of the industry and the customers that work within it, but also then further develop that idea of what's modern methods of construction, what is retrofit, all these things, even just considering net zero or considering reducing carbon in the built environment. Those things, I think, were essential sort of thought processes at the beginning to create what was created in apprenticeship delivery within the group. It's slightly, not dissimilar with the engagement that we then went on to have with the wider industry. So again, I think that piece was around, from 2019, having that main provider status meant that as a PLC group, as a group of businesses that were, number one building material supplier in the UK, to have the responsibility of that and to maintain that, you have to look at the wider industry and appreciate the wider industry. So I think that external look to the industry was, look, we've been through this pain. We've grown the team from 5 people to 55 people now, from 50 to 100 apprentices to over 1,000 apprentices. We've done the hard work. We've been through all of those challenges that we've just mentioned, and going out to the wider industry and engaging them with the idea of doing this too, because the responsibility is not just for the PLC, but for the wider industry as well. So yeah, it's a lofty, a wide-reaching decision process, but I think that's kind of where we are and where we were and where we're going and how we're trying to get there.
But it makes perfect sense. No matter how lofty it may seem, we are, yourselves as apprenticeship managers and leaders, you are in effect training the next generation of workers to be successful in their careers, and it's an effective way to do so. So that passion, that drive in order to do so, and the passion to make changes within, not just within the company or the organization, but as you said, Barry, the industry overall. So there is great contributions to be made to whatever industry you're partaking in. Claire, I know with your background in education, obviously apprenticeships, I'm assuming, wasn't so much of a leap towards that. But what influenced your decision to go to apprenticeships?
So for us, very similar to Barry, really. Our thought process and decision making all happened around the same time, and I'm going to be very honest, it started with discussions over an ever-growing levy pot that was being underutilised. It coincided with a real change in attitude to people development and culture, a change in senior leadership, which allowed us to be a bit more forward thinking, a bit more focusing, and to really look at, we're the same, we retain our staff really well, we have an ageing population, and it's not going to be long before we have a real skills gap problem. And because our industry is really niche and specialised, it was really to take a plunge and do something different. And we had a great opportunity to do this, but also not just to get younger people into the business, which is what we needed, but also there has never been a qualification that fit with what we do and a pathway that fit with what we actually do as an organisation and a business, until around 2016-17 when this was created. So it gave our people an opportunity to develop much deeper knowledge, skills and behaviour, to invest in their development, and to allow them progressional routes as well within the business. And it really also gave us an opportunity to control the delivery to some extent, to really influence and shape how we wanted our programme of delivery. We are very passionate about face-to-face delivery. I know since lockdown people have gone on to different programmes, but it was very passionate for us, and we have maintained right the way through lockdown. We were very fortunate that we were able to do face-to-face delivery, and that has a really positive impact on our people. So there was lots of different factors that really influenced our decision, and this was a long period of time these discussions happened, because you have to have the expertise, and I was brought in at the right time with my passion and background, and you know, passion is a word that you really need with apprenticeships, because it's not easy. And when you are trying to influence people that don't understand apprenticeship provision and the complexities of the compliance and the funding rules, and then all of the inspectorates that you're going to be in front of, you have to be that voice, and you have to make sure that you are doing it for the right reasons and people understand the journey that you're about to embark on. So there was lots of really in-depth conversations around why we decided to be an employer provider.
Yeah, if I may add, and I think it's really interesting, because if we look at all the conversations that we've had from some of the smaller organisations that have approached us to say, look, we would like to consider delivering apprenticeships. We've spoken to a number of organisations, and indeed how Richard and I met a number of years ago was working on workshops that we co-delivered with each other for the Department for Education, for the ESFA, really speaking to employers about and being candid and honest about what it takes to be an apprenticeship training provider. What you then do after attending our workshops is sort of entirely down to you. If you decide at this point it's not for you, equally you've made an informed decision. But if you decide to go ahead with it, then equally you know what you're getting yourself into, and you've made a decision based on the kind of a bit more clarity. So the kinds of conversations that we've had, it sort of resonates with me from what Barry and Claire have said. The sort of introduction of the levy has been a bit of a game changer for the larger employer, where they have been able to sort of sit down and very seriously consider, okay, you know, we're now paying into this apprenticeship levy pot. What are our options? What can we do with this? Can we deliver apprenticeships ourselves? Is that a real option for us, or should we outsource it all, etc., etc.? So that in itself has been an instigator. And as Claire's mentioned, a lot of the conversations, I think right at the start at that time, even when we had it with newer organisations or organisations new to the levy at the time, were very much around how can we use this so we don't lose this money, because that was the perception at the time, is that we are losing this money into this account and we can't use it for anything other than apprenticeships. And then when they started to sort of tell us that, you know, these are the problems that they're having were aging workforce, can't get the recruits, can't get the individuals into the business, struggling with recruitment, retention, so training and development, no real structured programs or pathways. We've got an aging workforce, so there's a skills issue, if you like, looming, and also diversity, as that's been mentioned as well. So we were looking for a more diverse workforce. So all of these problems and issues would come out of these conversations. And actually the biggest one that we hear of since then and now, so I literally just spoke to an ex-colleague of mine from Business Link yesterday, and she's got a manufacturing company based here, and they make white goods, so like washing machines and things like that, and they're struggling, but it's exactly the same reason as the availability of training. So a lot of companies, when they're considering delivering training themselves, it is because they're receiving mediocre training, or they can't get the training, or the training that they receive is ad hoc, or it's completely unavailable, or that even if the apprenticeship training providers are out there and they're saying that they are delivering the apprenticeship training, that the organisation is looking for, that actually when it comes to it, it's not exactly what they require, or if they get underway, then it's what Barry and Claire were both saying in terms of it doesn't really match up to expectations and it's not relevant and not forward and future thinking. So by far, when we talk to providers and organisations that look to deliver their own apprenticeship training, it is for that reason. It's to kind of fix that problem, which is can't get the training, and if we have got the training or the providers are out there, they're either not local or they can't deliver to us, or when they do deliver to us, it's just irrelevant and it's mediocre.
So I think, yeah, that levy point, that 2017 white paper on the apprenticeship levy and the idea behind that is sound. It is the right idea that if employers can't get the skills from schools or colleges, then they're the experts in this area. You're the expert in your organization, in your industry, then go and make it happen. That I wholeheartedly agree with and wholeheartedly think is a great idea. Where the biggest challenge comes, I think, is where we've tried to mash work-based learning and employers having the control, and we've tried to smash that together with academic learning through what Bally was talking about earlier on with compliance and funding rules and things like that. Where we tried to smash those two things together, I think that's where we've had the challenge. So the principle is sound. The idea that employers take responsibility for your industry, that's the bit I think that we need to really push. Claire mentioned trailblazer groups. Just getting employers on trailblazer groups to design the programs, to create the apprenticeships, to drive the evolution of those apprenticeships is so important. But as an industry, you are as a business within an industry, you've got to take that responsibility on. And I think that's where employer providers really took that mantle on board and go, yeah, okay, well, we'll do it, and this is how we're going to do it. And then opening that up to the rest of the industry is the route that makes the most sense. If we want the control, we have to get together and we have to work together, collaborate, and become our own little ecosystem to create the development and the training we need for our businesses, for our future customers, and for our current customers.
Thank you, Barry, as well. Richard, I wanted to get your thoughts because there's evidently a lot of passion here for the apprenticeships in general, and I wanted to get your thoughts on how much that passion has been exhibited by the people that you've worked with in your capacity. How important is passion to achieving those results that you're looking for? Is it tangible? Can it be quantified in any way? Can you compare some you dealt with which exhibited plenty of passion and others didn't? What were the differences?
Thank you. I'll keep my answer fairly brief. Yeah, it is about passion, but I would translate that word into something that I think organisations like Ofsted tend to explore more commonly, and that is commitment. And it's interesting, because as an inspector, every single training provider and employer provider will tell you that they are highly committed to apprenticeships. It's the first thing they tell you. They probably don't realise that every other provider in the land will say exactly the same thing. But of course, what you're looking for is actually how that manifests itself. And it manifests itself in a number of ways, not least of which is releasing the learners for the off-the-job training, which we've talked quite a lot about already. It manifests itself in, as Bally was talking about, the line manager commitment within the employer towards the apprentices, and you find that can vary tremendously from line managers who are very, very invested in their apprentices to others who have been told that they've got to look after or take on an apprentice and are doing it very reluctantly. And it can also manifest itself in whether the employer or line manager rocks up for things like progress reviews, the tripartite review between the learner, the line manager and the training or employer provider representative. And there are lots of other ways in which that commitment can be manifested. And a lot of providers I've worked with, they talk a great game about commitment and passion, but they don't necessarily demonstrate it at the coal face when it comes to things like reviews, releasing learners, the support that they're giving the apprentices in the workplace. And that's really one of the big differences between training providers and employer providers who do exceedingly well at inspection and those who don't.
I think that's very valuable to all of us, Richard. Thank you. So let's move forward. We've gone over what the main challenges everyone are aware of and everyone's encountered. And, you know, Barry, you've definitely alluded to improvements to be made and what is the ideal way to provide these apprenticeships. Now, given your experience, obviously there are further challenges to be encountered. Would you recommend that other organizations consider delivering these apprenticeships at all as they are, or would you want further amendments to be made to the system overall? What are your thoughts on that? Because apprenticeships are obviously a great way to upskill people, develop their careers and such. But if you do want to recommend other organizations consider delivering these apprenticeships, what about the system needs to be improved first and foremost?
Wow, that's a whole new podcast. I think, would we recommend? Yeah, of course we do, and we've already, encouraged 50+ businesses outside of Travis Perkins Group to engage with apprenticeships, to engage with content creation, to engage with the way that apprenticeships work for the industry that we work in. So yeah, I think through partnerships in organizations, everybody has a really valid voice, but when we speak as an industry, we have more power and we have a louder voice in that forum. We partnered with the Builders Merchant Federation at the very beginning of delivering externally, and that gave us a louder voice. You know, there are areas and within any industry that need to get together and stop thinking about their own little bit of the industry and think about the industry as a whole. So yeah, the encouragement is to, for want of a better phrase, take the leap, try it, give it a go, and you know what, help us develop, help us create what the industry needs. Like Claire's already mentioned, those trailblazer groups are essential. And I think if we are to change, if we're to lobby, if we're to change the way apprenticeships are misconceived in many industries, I think we have to be brave. You know, we have to be brave, and we have to be out there, and we have to be shouting about how we want to influence those decisions and those opportunities for the future.
Thank you, Barry. Claire, let's say you did want to recommend another organization to be delivering apprenticeships. How would you pitch it to them from your own experience? And of course, yes, what improvements do you think overall should be made to the system to enable things to run smoother and for people to have more of an opportunity to act upon the passion that they have for apprenticeships like you yourself have?
Yeah, sure. I would absolutely encourage anybody to really look into what it is to be an employer provider, but with that, really ensuring that you reach out, you research, you surround yourself with areas of expertise or people who have expertise and experience in the world of apprenticeships, because the complexities around starting out as an employer provider, the whole process of application is very difficult and very challenging, and the guidance is there, but you sometimes have to go and find it, and it's, you know, making connections with people. So like I connected with Bally and with Richard very early on, and you know, that source of support and guidance was really important to us and really helped us to steer the direction that we wanted to go in, because it can feel like a very lonely place out there for an employer provider, particularly one that, you know, is just venturing into apprenticeships for the first time, regardless of being an employer provider. So it's really networking understanding what the provision is. But for me, the biggest thing, and we've alluded to this, and Bally did, with providers, training provider, or employers being let down by quality of training, you're in control of that because it's yours and you want to make this successful and you want high quality training provision and you want achievers. So it gives you control over the quality aspect. So, you know, you have to put an awful lot of work into it, but really understanding the complexities of the compliance part of it. My background was very similar to Barry's. You know, started off as an assessor, IQA, and kind of went through all different roles, very much around delivery and curriculum and the management side of it. What I didn't know and didn't really understand was the funding rules in any great depth, the compliance piece. So therefore you have to surround yourself with people that really do know and can guide you. But it's something that it's been an incredible journey for us, and it still is a journey for us. We never stop learning. We want to continually improve. But as a business, it was the right decision for us, with its challenges, but it comes with rewards at the end, and that's what we take away from that, is the rewards and when we see our apprentices achieving. So a difficult journey, but it's a rewarding journey as well.
Claire, I appreciate the thoughts, and you actually took the words out of my mouth. I was actually going to echo those sentiments by saying it's a good thing that you got in contact with both Richard and Bally, because yes, there are challenges. We've all established that, but Bally and Richard are indeed the people to go to break down those barriers and to achieve further success. So I did
Without a doubt.
Thank you. I did want to pose the question to both Bally and Richard as well. In a nutshell, the apprenticeship system. Bally, you first. How can it be improved, if at all?
I'm gonna nick Barry's words and say that's a whole new podcast, Vinh, and I think we ought to consider talking about that one in another podcast. It's almost there's too much to try to sort of finalize in a few points, but simplification of those funding rules just to make it easier, to give employers and training providers a little bit more freedom and flexibility to be creative with design, delivery of programs that are just going to make all the benefits today and for the future. Just to have a little bit more freedom would be good, rather than to be bogged down in hundreds of pages of compliance, because that can take a lot of time. So it's quite laborious and time consuming. I think if the only thing, my kind of parting gift on this one in terms of that sort of takeaway point, it would be this one, which would be, you know, let's try and minimize the time spent on compliance, funding rules, signatures, you know, dotting I's, crossing T's, and make more space and time to improve apprenticeship experience and just create quality products, really. They are out there, providers are out there, and I'd highly recommend as well any organisation to certainly consider becoming an apprenticeship training provider, especially your employer and you're a levy payer, and reach out to us where they need the help and support. But yeah, that's kind of my one big takeaway, but I think it is definitely another podcast. Pass over to Richard.
Yeah, I completely agree with everything that you and Barry have said there. Probably a whole new podcast on that. I think the thing that concerns me, and it's a subject for another day, most of all really, is the move away from traditional level 2 and level 3 apprentices for young people coming into industry for the first time. I don't see nearly as much of that type of provision as I used to. I see a lot of provision at the other end of the scale, level 5 and above, for existing staff and managers. I think that's great, but I think there needs to be some redress of the balance in terms of who apprenticeships are aimed at and what is their primary purpose. And I'll leave it there because that is a big topic.
Definitely, it's something we will elaborate on in a future podcast, as you suggested, Bally. But I did want to clarify the points that you made, because what I've taken out of it, Bally, is that essentially there's too much time being spent on bureaucracy and not enough time being spent on the quality and delivering of the training, purely because if I've got this right, all these providers feel like they just don't have the time or the resources to deliver the training that they want to do. Have I got that right?
Essentially, it can be like that, Vin, but I think you have to, once you're underway with that journey, you really have to try to steal the time for the right reasons. Yes, there's compliance. Yes, there's quality, there's curriculum, but actually it's about being creative. It's about doing the right thing, everything that Claire and Barry have said, and all the providers that Richard and I work with, that they do apprenticeships for the right reasons, for the good of the industry, for the good of the employers, for the good of the apprentices, for the future proofing of industries and safeguarding of jobs, if you like, sustainable jobs in the future, and also looking to the future and looking to see how those industries are changing within 5 to 10 years time. If you do it for those reasons and you stay fixated on that as a vision, the compliance has to be done, but I think provided you can be consumed more by that rather than compliance, I think that's where probably we need to be.
It's the impact, isn't it, Bally? It's the impact that compliance has on the delivery of that training, and that's the important. Does it have a positive impact? We should definitely have compliance. We should definitely have rules that sit around that, because we don't want a load of cowboys coming into the process and not delivering quality content. But I think is the impact of those rules, that compliance, is the impact, a positive impact on the apprentice and on the employer. That's the key, definitely.
Thank you, Barry. And as Bally said, see, Barry and Claire, you both mentioned this. It is all about making the time, because this is something, it sounds quite blunt to say so, but this is something that providers sign up to. And, you know, they knew what the responsibilities were. They knew what the challenges were, to an extent, of course. So when it comes to time, it's all about managing it. I do agree with that. Let's wrap it up. Claire, did you have any final thoughts on this? You know, you are head of training. There are further challenges to be encountered. What I'm getting from you is that this is really rewarding. This is definitely worth it. Were there any final thoughts in regards to why you deliver apprenticeships? What are your views for the future? That's all. What do you envision and what do you hope to envision, let's say?
So really for us, it's just continual growth of our provision without losing the quality that we've built up. And it's to give people opportunities. So we want to get to a stage where when we're recruiting and doing direct recruiting, we are thinking apprenticeships first, and can we convert this position into an apprenticeship provision, and really influencing that the passion that is behind the apprenticeships, but also getting the message about apprenticeships out there. So one of the biggest things for us is there's still a stigma. There's still a lot of unknowns around apprenticeships, and for our more mature employees, they still think that apprenticeships are just for 16 to 18-year-olds. But now we're seeing a real change in mindset as more and more of our working population are embarking on different levels. We've got entry level right up to degree level. And I think for myself, pretty much like Barry, my career started on an apprenticeship. I have just completed another apprenticeship, a degree level apprenticeship. And I think if people can show and demonstrate that apprenticeships don't discriminate and they're open for everybody to do, as long as they meet the eligibility criteria, then it has that positive impact, and it's a great way of supporting businesses and industries by having the work-based learning element of that.
Thank you very much, Claire. Barry, in a nutshell, what do you hope to see in the future for apprenticeships?
For us personally, I think it's about, again, like Claire said, that dispelling the myths that exist out there, and it can be a generational thing. Different people feel, you know, attribute different things to apprenticeships, so that's a big one for us. But I think we want to be the leading provider in the construction supply sector. We want to help and support to develop the next generation workforce, who understand the current and future needs of our organisations and our customers, are to be able to build better communities. It's all those things. And again, I think, you know, to continue to be a leading partner to the construction supply industry is where we want to go with this, and engage with as many people as possible to talk to us, to engage with apprenticeship ideals and use their voice to to create something that, yeah, ultimately, you know, I could give you 101 success stories, and, you know, our job is to change people's lives. And that's what we do on a daily basis, and that's what we want to continue to do.
Great, thank you so much, Barry. Richard and Bally, I just want to finish off this podcast with both yourselves. In a nutshell, again, Bally, what is the main challenge which needs to be addressed to improve the apprenticeship system overall? And Richard, the same question will go towards yourself.
Yeah, I think as mentioned, you know, if we can reduce the heavy compliance element, that'll be good. If employers start to think down this line and really see it as a beneficial and rewarding thing that they can do, is having that impact in their own industry and in their own sector, and being part of communities such as Trailblazers and other sort of employer groups to really sort of embrace, share and share their expertise, get involved in collaboration projects. I know it's tough because of the time elements these days, going back to Richard's point earlier on in the podcast about just time not being available, staff not being available, employers are taking on less and less sort of new recruits and sharing the work out in amongst existing staff. So I can appreciate the kind of complexities, but I think for me the big one is definitely consider it, definitely get involved in those communities and speak to experts like ourselves. We can take you through a process which will show you kind of how close or far you are to actually delivering apprenticeships and just make that journey so much easier for you and so much smoother and pave the way.
And Richard, what are your thoughts? Would you, if you had everyone who delivered apprenticeships in one room, what is the one piece of advice you'd tell them to improve the apprenticeship system overall?
I'm not going to talk about the system as such, because I don't really sort of deal in apprenticeship systems. I'm just going to go back to your sort of previous question, which was slightly different, and say that for me, going forward, what is fantastic about the work that people like Clare and Barry do is it's chipping away at the perception of apprenticeships as a sort of second class route, if you like, when it comes to gaining qualifications. And I'm going to go back a little bit on something I said earlier, in that when apprenticeships were very much just about level 2 and perhaps level 3, often college leavers who perhaps hadn't done academically very well at school, you know, they went to college or wherever and did an apprenticeship. I think apprenticeships really suffered in terms of their image as a second class route. And I think one of the great things about offering apprenticeships at higher levels, and also employers like Travis Perkins and Steris being able to offer apprenticeships, is it's opened up the world of apprenticeships to a much wider audience. I now see a lot of university graduates doing apprenticeships when they've left university, often because they've actually realised that, you know, they perhaps shouldn't have gone to university in the first place, but that's the gold standard, and that's the kind of expectation in this country, that you do GCSEs, A levels, and then you just go to university. And I think all of this work that particularly as we've got employers here today, the employer providers are doing at different levels within their organisations, from operational right up to senior leadership, is helping to chip away at that image of apprenticeships being a second class route and actually being a very valuable qualification in terms of your career advancement.
Not to be too biased myself, but I would absolutely mirror your sentiments at the end there, especially Richard. It is definitely valuable. And of course, as everyone else has mentioned, there needs to be more information put out there, because the information is there, but not everyone's aware that no, apprenticeships are no longer, if they ever were, restricted to school leavers, as it were. The amount of apprenticeships on offer is an increase, the depth and breadth of them. And let's put the message out there. So with that, let's finish up. I want to give thank yous to both Barry and Clare for joining us today. Your insights have been invaluable, so thank you so much. And of course, once again, thank you to both Bally and Richard for your most invaluable input also. Thank you very much for joining us on this podcast, and we will see you at the next one.